The agenda of the B.Arch Semester 8 Urban Studies Studio at the Sushant School of Art and Architecture is fairly simple. We work on two major learning outcomes. One being that our participants should learn how to understand and decipher an urban area, all the information that appends it, and the second being to be able to respond to that urban area in a more sensitive, more responsible, in an apt and reasonable manner. So when Gaurav and I as student directors, we started taking the call of which city to work with. We were very clear on Delhi because we knew that all the course participants were well aware of the city of Delhi. And then came the question of what sites to probably choose in that big area. So we worked with 4 sites. We chose Paharganj, Lajpat Nagar, Bikaji Kama Place and Saket. All 4 interesting in their own selves. And I mean, the group that we're talking about worked on the most complex of these 4 sites. They were working with Paharganj. It looks very simple as a place, but it is very complex. I mean, inside those 2-story houses and probably behind those plain walls, you find a lot of information, a lot of diverse information in demography, in terms of lifestyle, in terms of how people live. The good thing about this batch was that they didn't try to probably work with very standard notions of how the information is probably interpreted, but they used that basic data to identify those threads on which this information is tied. And what they did was they identified those important threads which are predominantly the main agendas of exploration in Paharganj. So, I mean, these threads range from the whole idea of how Paharganj contributes to Delhi and how Delhi is consuming Paharganj, to the fact of how informality and temporality can be used as a tool to satisfy the requirements or the demands of people. And in that process, they have probably done a lot of site studies, they have probably mapped a lot of ground information, they have interacted with stakeholders, and they have also referred to what are the upcoming guidelines or upcoming development proposals in the city. And with that, they have then developed strategies to improve these agendas and finally come up with architectural interventions in the process.
In order to understand the present and leave a mark on the future, it is important to understand and delve into the past. As the colorful and vibrant place it is today, Paharganj's history is no different. During the Mughal period, a couple of centuries back, in the 1700s, Paharganj gained importance as the Anaj Mandi. It was one of the 5 primary marketplaces under the kingdom of Shahjahanabad. It was then known as Shahganj or King's Marketplace. The reason behind it being an Anaj Mandi was probably its strategic location and proximity to river Yamuna, as Yamuna was the channel between Shahadra, which was in the eastern edge of Delhi and served as the storehouse for grains, and Paharganj, which was the marketplace. Hence, Yamuna River acted like the channel for transportation of grains. On the brink of British India, during the 1800s, Paharganj grew in size. It was due to the consolidation of nearby neighborhoods which were small in size, namely Paharganj, Kishanganj, Pahadi Dheeraj, coming together and forming one consolidated mass. During the 1900s, the British were really able to establish their supremacy over us. They were looking for an imperial capital. Paharganj at this time was soaring as a marketplace, specializing in cloth. It was also centrally located and an obvious choice for the capital. But the viceroy found that the compensation rates of the property were very high, and they shifted the capital to the Raisina Hill, the central Delhi we see today. As a result, Paharganj started losing its sheen as the focus shifted on the capital. Nonetheless, a major development which was a game changer for Paharganj occurred during this time. In 1931, the New Delhi railway station came into existence. Also, a very important landmark in today's time, the iconic Imperial Theatre got constructed in 1930. It was really after India gained independence that the Paharganj we see today started shaping up. There was a major influx of refugees from Pakistan, Bangladesh, etc. and a lot of small businesses and small shops came into existence during this time. The influx of refugees was the major reason for the boom in both population density and the increase in density of urban fabric. Contemporary Paharganj, the Paharganj that we see today, started shaping up during the late 1960s and 70s, where it was a big supporter of the hippie culture and it got notoriously famous because it was in proximity with the railway station, and also it provided dirt cheap accommodation of hotel rooms on the D.B. Gupta Road. The Paharganj that we see today is an accurate example of palimpsest, where old traces of old facades can be still seen in layers. It is as if the new facade is juxtapositioned on the old one. It is interesting to note that the eclectic mix is not exactly a coincidence. Even though there is a radical change in the material, the architectural typologies and features take inspiration from the past. The labyrinth of tiny gullies and old facades add to the nostalgia, whereas the neon lights, transient population, and the hotel culture screams contemporary. As a result of its colorful culture, we can see how Paharganj is heavily influenced by world cultures due to it being a tourist attraction spot. We can easily find cafes selling dishes like chicken a la Kiev on the same road as dhabas selling a heartwarming plate of chole bhature.
Four major roads mark the boundaries of Paharganj, the roads being Chelmsford Road, that is the road in front of the railway station at the east, Panchkuya Road at the south, Chitragupt Road at the west, and the D.B. Gupta Road, that is the road connecting to the highway and dividing Paharganj in almost two equal parts at the north. The northern edge of Paharganj is notably famous for its budget hotels, providing accommodation mostly to students and hippies, due to which it becomes quite congested. Despite having the widest footpath, a lack of hawkers is seen there. The western edge majorly contains motor repair shops along with the CPWD living quarters, due to which it becomes the most residential of all edges. The southern edge contains the Ramakrishna metro station, which is the closest metro station to Paharganj on the Blue Line. This transit point is surrounded by autos and rickshawalas at all times. The south of Paharganj connects to the outer circle of CP. Due to the presence of a major hospital, Lady Harding Medical Hospital, this edge becomes quite formal and a few hawkers and rickshawalas are seen there. The junction between CP and the eastern edge becomes quite an important one. Keeping in mind that the outer circle is one-way traffic, this is the only junction that connects the railway station to the center of trade in Delhi. The railway station encloses a lot of railway offices such as the DRM office, which have access from the eastern side. The eastern edge is fairly formal, but the presence of a few hawkers on the footpaths or the side lanes adds a bit of informality to it. The busiest junction is in front of the railway station, where cars come from both the sides. That is, from the D.B. Gupta side, from the Chelmsford Road side, plus the traffic from the railway station. A lot of vendors and food thelas can be seen there. A small and temporary clothes market can be seen in front of the railway station, covering the entrance of a educational institute named Maulana Azad Education Foundation. The junction has availability of autos, rickshaws and e-rickshaws.
To transform a larger urban context like Paharganj, it is imperative for us to understand what, or rather who actually defines a city, the users. When we look at the dense fabric of Paharganj, it is important for us to consider the two divisional categories these users fall under, the local population and the floating population. The local population of Paharganj consists of users who have settled down post-independence. These users either own or are employed in large wholesale or retail businesses across the area. An interesting observation is the existing disparity between the high literacy rate and the subsequent employment rate in this area. area. Despite a literacy rate of 84%, more than half of the population of Paharganj still remains to be unemployed to this date, which is pretty shocking. Another alarming observation is that despite the census data showing us that 1/3 of the population is predominantly women, the on-site reality showcases something extremely shocking. Less than 10% of the women are actually seen consuming public spaces in Paharganj. Despite 1.7 lakh number of local users in this area, none of them are seen mingling or consuming the public spaces, owing to issues that stem from larger issues such as safety and social security. Thus, the true essence of Paharganj and its consumption actually lies with the floating population. Owing to its vicinity to the railway station, budget hotels and economic accommodations serve as the largest trigger of floating footfall, which is only 1/3 Indian in nature, meaning 2/3 of the population is actually foreign. The influence of this floating population, which is foreign in nature, has radically transformed the traditional bazaars of Paharganj into a hippie-centric zone with niches that cater to the needs and interests of backpackers and tourists. Overall, Paharganj can be understood as a dense zone of diverse demographics that is fast-paced, dynamic in nature, transformative, and a one of its kind. While observing the bylaws in Paharganj, it is important for us to understand what the Delhi Master Plan for 2021 has in store. According to the Delhi Master Plan, Paharganj has been demarcated as a dedicated residential redevelopment zone with commercial activity. This, however, clashes with the on-site reality where numerous commercial zones have been demarcated as residential zones in the Master Plan as well as other built-use plans. Paharganj also falls under the no-fly zone, which gives rise to a building height restriction of 15 meters. The floor area ratios for residential plots vary from 1.2 to 3.5. For commercial zones vary from 0.7 to 2.2. Ground coverages range from 40 to 90%, and a setback of 3 meters is required for any plot exceeding 100 square meters. However, the most interesting observation is that none of these bylaws are currently being followed in Paharganj. The lack of following of these bylaws has led to Paharganj creating its own built language, characterized by its vast, dense, and congested fabric.
Paharganj, a critical gateway zone to the international backpacker, while providing home and businesses to many refugees after the partition in India. An area where layers upon layers of distinct culture overlap, merge, interact, and assimilate into a complicated urban fabric. Paharganj is a very interesting mix of culture, history, and demographics, providing a unique germination ground of ideas for the students in our studio. Our studio is an effort to study and ideate upon urban level interventions in this unique cultural identity of Delhi.
As one can amusingly notice, the built fabric is very densely packed and organically arranged. This holds true even in the case of the built block size and its arrangement around primary and secondary roads, but goes on becoming denser and denser in interior areas along tertiary roads. As a result, this leads to lack of open green congregation spaces like parks, and even if present, are abandoned voids used for parking. The eastern side of the map, on the contrary, has very less amount of built due to presence of open lands of railway authority. Conclusively, the denseness at one case acts as a catalyst for communion but also deteriorates the living conditions. Ironically, and to our surprise, residents seem happy and contented with what they have. The pre-existing pockets were around New Delhi railway station and Main Bazaar Road around 1931. The built heritage in Paharganj is majorly concentrated around Chetuti Chowk, Rajguru Marg and Main Bazaar Road, along with some pockets towards the northern side of Paharganj in form of old settlements and retail markets. Currently, the old residential settlements exist in small pockets, marked in dark brown in the map. Rest of the fabric with time were either demolished and renovated, or new hotels came up in their place due to boom in tourist activities. Considering retails, they were retained around old commercial markets like Main Bazaar Road, but renovated time to time with new features like rooftop cafes added. The web of roads is divided into primary, secondary and tertiary roads based on their width and purpose. Interestingly, one may ponder that the road skeleton exists as a mix of formal and informal road layout. Secondary road 1 to 2 lane wide take one to interior of Paharganj, bustling due to commercial activities and cheap hotels. Tertiary roads connect us to a more private tissue of Paharganj, flanked by small residential areas. Just a lane wide, they facilitate informal pedestrian and two-wheeler movement. Contrary to this, the primary and secondary roads are highly congested due to heavy vehicular movement, ignoring safety of pedestrians. It's ironical how Paharganj, which is famous for its gullies and informal street culture, lacks proper and safe pedestrian infrastructure. The built fabric is majorly public, consisting of cheap hotels, retails and informal street markets. Private built consists of residences which exist as pockets of various sizes scattered all over Paharganj. These are placed in interior areas along tertiary roads, while the public built sits on periphery of primary and secondary roads. Private spaces are reserved in interior, laid out in organically. This organic nature of arrangement is due to the age-old existence of these settlements. The right side of Paharganj is majorly private, consisting of railway backyards and rest houses.
Zone 3 is considered as one of the most famous tourist spots of Paharganj, considering the location of Sitaram ke Chole Bhature. Another famous spot here is the Red Imperial Theatre, which was made in the 1930s, which is not being used as a cinema hall at the moment. There's also a Khalsa Primary School, a Christian cemetery, temples and many public buildings. With about 70% of commercial units present in this area, only 30% contribute to the residential part of it. The upper floors are dedicated for residential units and sometimes an extension of the commercial units that are down below. Zone 4 is adjacent to Zone 3, which is considered as one of the hotspots of international tourists, considering the number of international cuisine restaurants and the cheap hotels that are present over here. This area comprises of about 60% of commercial activities and only 40% of residential activities. These 60% of commercial activities are usually contributed by the travel agents and the souvenir shops and the hotels that are present in this vicinity. Zone 6, which is adjacent to Zone 3 and right opposite to Zone 4, provides same activities for the tourist. The Mushtaq Rai Road and the Main Bazaar Road are filled with retail shops. However, the tertiary roads of this area are filled with residential units. The tertiary roads of Zone 6 take us to Zone 1, which as comparison to the other three zones is very different in its nature. Surrounded by three main roads on the sides, it has a lot of residential units in its center. The upper portion of the zone faces the D.B. Gupta Road, which has a line of hotels. On the right hand side is the Chelmsford Road, filled with restaurants and travel agents, as a result of the New Delhi railway station right opposite to it. Down below is the Main Bazaar Road, filled with souvenir shops, which leads to the Chhe Tuti Mark. This area is considered as one of the oldest areas of Paharganj, and it is very different in its nature as compared to the other three zones that we've spoken about. The zone opposite to Zone 1 on the D.B. Gupta Road is the Zone 6, which frontlines the road with the St. Anthony School, Sheila Theatre and a public building. The other two edges are mostly retail and hotels. The Arapasha Road has about 400 hotels present on the single stretch. These hotels are much bigger in size and are much more expensive and invites both international and national tourists. The zone adjacent to this is the Zone 8, which is a complete contrast of what's happening in Zone 7. This zone is a primarily residential zone which has a lot of religious buildings surrounding it. It has a Gurudwara, it has a mosque right in front of it, then it has many small temples present in the vicinity and also opposite to it. This area also has many institutional buildings and public amenities. Zone 5 is adjacent to 7 and 8, and which is very different from what we've seen in Zone 8. Zone 8 has a much more organic or haphazard growth, whereas in Zone 5 we start seeing a much organized streets. The ground floor is mostly commercial, whereas the upper floors are taken for the residential units. It is a center of many food joints, restaurants and shops as well. A similar zone is right opposite to Zone 5. This is the Zone 9. This also has many organized streets with a lot of religious buildings and Barat Ghar present in this area. All the 8 zones that we've spoken about have a similar nature in terms of built use. All the commercial units are coming on the ground floor and the residential units are mostly on the upper floors, and all these units are very closely packed with thin gullies. But there was one zone which was very different from all of this. This was the Zone 2. The most important function present in Zone 2 is the New Delhi railway station, around which all the buildings facilitate the smooth functioning of the New Delhi railway station. It gathers the most amount of people coming in from Delhi and coming in from other cities and states as well. We also see a lot of commercial shops coming in, which is only on the ground floor. In the upper part of this stretch, there's also a railway colony that houses all the workers that are working in the railway station. The other thing that is very different from the rest of Paharganj is that every building or every facility has only one function on every floor. Paharganj over the years has become a center for many cheap hotels and guest houses ranging from Rs 50 to Rs 2000. The hotels in the main bazaar area are much cheaper and much smaller inside. It has become a center for cheap laser cutting and a center for raw materials like timber, glass and acrylic. Zone 3, 4 and 5 have become hotspots for local cuisines. Apart from this, there are also many international cuisine restaurants that are present here. Apart from these formal units, there are also many informal units in the name of vendors and hawkers floating all across Paharganj, selling fruits, vegetable, food items, daily essentials, mud products, etc. There are also many travel agents that we can see on the DB Gupta Road, the Arakasha Road and the Main Bazaar Road.
Paharganj has quite an interesting urban scape. There are so many different types of people carrying out such different activities in cohesion and in coexistence. It is quite peaceful and serene in the morning, as opposed to the stark contrast one observes as the day progresses. Children are seen walking to school. Hawkers are setting up shop near the railway station and the main bazaar road. One observes the occasional chaiwala near the commercial areas on both primary and secondary roads, bartering delicacies with other hawkers, eating samosas and having a good time. Near Sitaram, one sees local as well as non-local tourists on rented e-bikes and cycles eating their morning breakfast. Transporters are seen removing their vehicles from areas which will now be bustling as lunchtime approaches. 1 p.m. brings in a lot of footfall for Paharganj. After all, it's lunchtime and it is closing time for schools. It is at this time that Paharganj is in full swing. The streets are lined with hawkers, the shutters are up, and the whole region is an amalgamation of people, cattle, motorized and non-motorized vehicles. The inner gullies are activated by cultural activities due to the presence of a large number of religious built. As one approaches the railway station, they are faced with a lot of vehicular congestion. This is due to the constant taxi pick and drop off. This area also consists of a lot of regulated and unregulated parking. Over here, one might be asked randomly to book a hotel or eat at a certain restaurant. As evening approaches, the activity in Paharganj increases. It truly epitomizes the true nature and existence of this place. All the stakeholders come out at this point. You see children on the street, tourists shopping and eating, and all the hawkers and retailers lined up. There is an intense vehicular movement intersecting with the hawkers who have occupied almost all the regions of Paharganj. Although, as dusk approaches, all this activity takes a steep turn. The residents start to return home, the hawkers pack up, and the tourists start heading out of Paharganj to close by areas such as Connaught Place or India Gate. We all have seen illustrious depictions of Paharganj with the big lit up hotel signs in movies like Devdi. But is it really like that? Although some streets do resemble that character, Paharganj is majorly a very unsafe and inactive space in the night. What is so active during the day now turns into dead parking spots. The only active spaces one might find in Paharganj would be the areas near the railway station and 2-3 government offices in its close proximity. One might observe the occasional chai wala in the internal gullies surrounded by 4 to 5 men.
This is group number 1, Bhavya, Saksham and Tarunima, and our site is Paharganj. So people of Paharganj engage in various kinds of activities, most that generate income. The fabric of Paharganj between sunrise to sunset actually sees a transformation of spaces and functions as well. So when we went on the site, we inferred that Paharganj lacks in open public spaces for interaction, but specifically for the residents of Paharganj. Also, there is a sense of boundary between the demographics due to the lack of neutral interaction spaces, which led us to deciding our agenda, which is voids and opportunities. So now coming out of the type of voids, there are majorly 3 types of voids. Physical voids, which are there present on the site itself. Second are functional voids. These are voids created for a function, for example an atrium or a courtyard. Then the third is cognitive voids. These voids are related to perceptions and are used to create visual effects. So at the bottom you see the 5 pictures. These are existing voids which are there on the site and we have documented those.
Yeah, so our idea is to translate these unused abandoned spaces and redevelop to activate them to be able to see the architectural response of this urban fabric. Our suggested strategies to deal with our agenda is: first is integration of the community spaces and functions to revive all the inactive voids. Second is redevelopment of voids to achieve formality of the informal spaces. We also designed a matrix, as you can see in the slide, that helped us to extract the voids with the great scope of intervention. So this is a flowchart showing the functional overlap within our strategies, which helped us to deduce the ideal elements of the interventions. These are pictures showing the context of one of the zones of our intervention and the pedestrian and vehicular congestion that revolves around it. This intervention revolves around the idea of decongestion by reallocating temporal function and introducing a multi-story parking. This slide shows one of the illustrations which was designed to achieve the required agenda, and it will be discussed in detail during the jury. Thank you.
Hi, we are Group 2, Ashni, Jaidev and Zora. Paharganj, colorful, diverse and fleeting. Sounds like an interesting place to be in, right? These interesting aspects are often overlooked by a larger issue, one impacting all stakeholders with a considerable weightage: safety. Pop culture, news articles and global online forums often depict Paharganj as this unsafe territory. But what leads to it being so unsafe? Regularly visiting Paharganj during different times of the day, we observed and collected data to identify a pattern, one which would help us understand why the issue of safety emerges and its consequent reactions shaping the urban fabric. Factors like employability and interaction of diverse groups in an unstructured society lead to conflict. We also observed the spatial fabric of Paharganj to understand its contribution to the factor of safety. Spatially exploring different agendas in Paharganj, we understood how informality and temporality are linked to safety and crime. Informal spaces without a formal structure and intemporal with respect to activities is the current trend in Paharganj. Informality and temporality help arrive at our master strategy to enhance safety, which is to introduce defensible spatial structures in Paharganj in certain zones and connect them to safer areas and landmarks to form identified routes. They formalize spaces but not while discouraging informal activities, rather keeping them open-ended instead of being rigid in terms of function like what Paharganj currently is. Follies became a design tool to translate our idea of identification and spatially formalizing a space in order to encourage this, thereby increasing safety. We identified 3 major sites for our design interventions: additive in nature as it supports a function, and 3 smaller sites which would be locations for a non-additive follies, simply adding spatial identification and flexibility. Our interventions are folly designs with identified elements according to surrounding context and functions. Through our follies, we attempt to explore informality and temporality as solutions to tackle the urban issue of safety in Paharganj, determined by the very same agendas.
One of the biggest challenges to heritage is the question, why conserve it? With all the new development of technologies around us, what is the need of conserving heritage? We often forget to realize the importance of heritage. Once we eventually become rich and successful as a country, we will be unable to trace back where it all started from. It is famously said, sometimes it is impossible to know where you are headed without reflecting on where you came from. We will be talking about built heritage and why is it important to a place such as Paharganj. The agenda is to explore the heritage hidden in Paharganj, which can be traced back to 382 years. The development of various architecture styles and typologies in all those years. There is essentially a need to make sure that heritage of Paharganj is marketed so that it generates money and becomes sustainable and also coexist with the current status of Paharganj. Heritage is not only about buildings, it also includes the story told by buildings and their styles, the literature, the art forms, the culture, the communities developed over the years. For our study, we have divided the heritage of Paharganj into the tangible heritage and the intangible heritage. Our interventions aim at conserving the heritage of Paharganj and works to utilize their potential and eventually help in generating income through them. By conserving old tangible heritage such as old chalks and abandoned houses dated back in the time of partition, and the intangible heritage by conserving the skills being used in the area which can be seen slowly diminishing over the course of time. One thing we've noticed during our study and analysis of Paharganj is that the heritage of the place has been ignored for so many years that it has led to it being demolished, abandoned, being in a very poor condition, or being highly underutilized. The heritage has started to disappear at a very fast pace. Our urban intervention plays a role in making people realize the importance of culture and the heritage existing around them, and giving them a sense of pride of what their origins are.
While walking through Paharganj, we felt its hustle bustle, which is different from any place else. Tourists, shopkeepers, backpackers, residents all come in together. But on the other hand, it lacks open and green spaces. The provided ones are locked. But these streets are filled with hotels, cabs, the movement, making it discomfortable for the people to gather around. Using this, we marked some of the opportunities which were available to us in Paharganj. The important thing was to understand the needs and wants of the various communities. While interacting with the residents, we realized that women and children were highly affected by the commercial activities taking place. We realized it was important for the residents to have spaces within their own localities, where the target group will be different. This is how our first strategy, Bed Hug, evolved. Due to lack of space, street realm, terrace realm, public realm were developed. While roaming around, we saw a few tourists complaining about the lack of relaxing space in the dense market. A lot of abandoned spaces, which once used to be community gatherings, are now abandoned, bringing us to our second strategy, Bachelors, where the functions like hanging out spaces, reading area, and landscape area would be introduced. While understanding Paharganj, we realized there's a lot of gap between the city and Paharganj. A boundary is created around it. which is creating a lot of difference. To remove this difference and bring the city and the Paharganj together comes to work our third strategy, SSAA. Combining all of this on a large platform brings us to our master strategy, revival of the non-functional and underutilized community spaces to retrieve Paharganj's glory.
Our site, Paharganj, a district which lies in central Delhi. So the day we got Paharganj, we, Group 5, had different perspectives about this place since we belong to different parts of the country, which was Delhi, NCR and Assam. So Amitos, belonging to Delhi, was well versed to the site and didn't find anything unusual. Whereas Pradyum was coming from Assam and was unable to figure out what actually was different about this district than other districts of the country. Whereas me, from Ghaziabad, trying to remember that my father told me once that this is not a safe place to go to. When we visited, we all knew somewhere that despite of these different perspectives that we could comprehend Paharganj in a certain manner, which was that it's a bustling district with packed lanes and overcrowded streets. It was a city self-sustained but also had overlapping different activities, stakeholders and a transport system. That's how we decided to explore Paharganj through the lens of movement. We wanted to tap movement of a city developed years ago. We started noticing issues like overcrowding of the people, broken footpaths, unorganized traffic system, lack of green spaces, lack of parking spaces, which was all an issue and resulting into a problem to daily lives and the movement pattern of the locals. Looking into this, we devised a master strategy to improve the vehicular movement and create pedestrian spaces in Paharganj. While we decoded the movement of Paharganj and then we bifurcated them into two parts, which was first was keeping in mind the need for the pedestrian space, while the second was an unsaid companion to the pedestrians, which was managing the volume of traffic. We felt bringing in importance to these factors, there was a need to decide certain tools for our intervention and bring out the optimum space for these factors. So the design tools we decided upon was scale change, grade change and a need for an optimum space. So ultimately, these tools resulted into drastic changes on the railway station side, TB Gupta Road, Main Bazaar Road and micro changes in the inner streets of Paharganj.
The agenda of Group 6 is tourism. Studying Paharganj through the lens of tourism, we observed several opportunities like proximity to the railway station, cheap hotels, etc. and some important issues like disconnect between the tourist places existing all over the Paharganj, lack of open spaces, etc. Master strategy was derived from one of the major issues, that is existing disconnect and lack of tourist spots and tourist activities all over Paharganj. Thus, broader aim is to connect and develop new and existing tourist spots and streamline them together in a loop. The master strategy was realized on the site in form of 3 sub-strategies. The first sub-strategy is giving thematic identities to the selective streets to rejuvenate their lost identity. Identification and rejuvenation of streets were done in a holistic loop to make better connections and to achieve better sense of directionality. Second sub-strategy is to connect the southern and the northern part of the Paharganj, which currently lies experientially disconnected in the place, partially pedestrianizing some parts of the streets, and site selection for spatial interventions played a vital role in achieving the idea of connecting both parts. Third sub-strategy is to develop existing nodes and fill in the gaps between the disconnected spaces and thus improve the directionality of the loop.
These strategies were implemented in the form of spatial interventions. The main intervention, the vantage point, which is placed in the empty void near Sheila Cinema on DB Gupta Road, aims to give a new identity from a tourist perspective to Paharganj. This will be the epicenter of Paharganj, bridging its disconnected parts. The next one is elevated public realm connected to Arakasha Road, formulated under the sub-strategy to develop thematic identity of streets in Paharganj. Such identity and theme-based interventions were also done on Main Bazaar Road, Mustaq Rai Road and Rajguru Marg, concretizing their character and structuring the tourist loop. Then comes our spot interventions under the third sub-strategy of nodal development. The first on the list is the Main Bazaar entrance node, which deals with the decongestion to make it more welcoming. Second one is Chhe Tuti Chowk, which deals with the revival of historical identity and its congregational character. Conclusively, interventions were not done solely with the aim of serving tourists, but also they parallelly respond to the residents of Paharganj too.
Paharganj, a place which have emerged with time. So, as we walked around the roads and street of Paharganj, we decided to work on agenda, transition and evolution. Working on site study and inferences, we came to the master strategy, redevelopment and conservation of urban residential fabric of Paharganj, under which we choose to work on the very potential area of Paharganj, Main Bazaar Road, as it has different type of residential typology and more tourist footfall. The sub-strategy after which came out here, first, revival of Katra and abandoned wooden houses, and second, exterior upliftment and restoration on Main Bazaar Road. Starting with the de-densification, the urban fabric of Paharganj is an urban heat island which is environmentally unsustainable, deprived of community spaces and essential amenities. So the proposal of strategical de-densification of urban fabric with addition of washroom will reduce the heat and make it more sustainable. Coming to next, there is also a loss and devaluation of cultural heritage in Paharganj. Katra is the existing built typology which is a solution to existing issues like environmentally unsustainable build, lack of community spaces, etc. More Katras are in poor condition and not maintained. Hence, this proposal is of redevelopment of Katra will help to retain its cultural value. Now, abandoned wooden houses. Abandoned wooden houses were converted to different functions according to a need of Paharganj, which mainly cater tourists and local people. First intervention was a community kitchen with private kitchen and seating space, which let the backpacker and tourists cook their own meal for their own taste. The second proposal on the abandoned wooden houses is Government Tourist Office. This helps the tourists for their safe services regarding the travelling. Exterior upliftment and conservation. The facade of main roads are non-homogeneous and loses heritage value. So the proposal for the conservation and upliftment, saving its heritage and increase the aesthetic of the facade.
Paharganj. It has a rich history of culture and religious diversity. To understand the basis and origin of how this works, we chose to study the strand that is the cultural and religious diversity of Paharganj. To explore this strand better, we looked at the history of Paharganj and tried to understand the culture and how it came into existence. Our agenda was to understand how community interaction promotes cultural diversity. To understand this, we divided communities into different sections such as age, business, tourist, religion, and language. These directly or indirectly contribute to the cultural diversity of Paharganj. Certain issues were identified based on the agenda along with site locations where the issues had a direct impact on the demographics. These provided us with opportunities to intervene architecturally and increase inter-community interaction. This led to the formulation of a master strategy with sub-layers such as interaction amongst existing communities and interaction amongst two or more different communities. These sub-layers act as a catalyst in amplification of cultural and religious diversity.
The first strategy, formulation of informal market and designated hawker zones, comes under the sublayer of increasing interaction between two or more different communities. The strategy deals with the formulation of an informal market, which would be a large demonstration area where hawkers from different parts of Paharganj will be able to showcase a wide variety of indigenous items. It will also include smaller hawker zones throughout Paharganj, where they would sell items in small quantities. This will also provide ease of access to people throughout the area of Paharganj.
A second sub-strategy, introduction of urban parks to create congregational spaces in a dense fabric, comes under the sublayer of interaction amongst an existing community. Upon questioning certain residents and via our own observations, it was concluded that adults and children need an open space in proximity to their homes to congregate. It was found that especially children belonging to these residential pockets required an open space to play, as they were being forced to play on the congested streets of Paharganj. In case of adults, the only congregational spaces that were identified in these residential pockets were institutions of religious importance and the chowkhats of their narrow streets.
Our third and final strategy is the multicultural street. Since Paharganj has an identity of a different kind, zooming into smaller pockets, we see that the identity gets lost. Backpackers are afraid to visit the area, leading to a decline in the population of tourists, affecting many stakeholders of Paharganj. To cater to this, we have come up with a multicultural street which will act as a catalyst in amplification of the decreasing footfall of Paharganj through cultural and religious diversity.
Hi, we are Group 9 and these are the first impressions of Paharganj for us. We witnessed some of the elements and qualities which were very distinct and unique to Paharganj, and these are some of them. And now as we continue to explore, we realize the people of Paharganj play the most important part in the urban setting. It was interesting how so many different types of people coexist in one environment and how they are connected to one another. After talking to various people, we listed down the major stakeholders and their needs and requirements as we investigated the issues on the ground level. The diagram here shows the different age groups and their needs and aspirations, and these are the interests, the conflicts faced by them. Moving forward in the studio, we started listing down the issues, reasons and the solutions. So the issues were like safety, traffic and congestion, lack of public infrastructure, walkability, access to landmarks and historical places, and time-based voids. So these are the reasons and the solutions. This brings us to our master strategy, that is empowering people of Paharganj to its culture and identity with the intent of employment, education and interaction. Now moving on to design interventions, we identified the temporal voids which can be utilized to their full potential. The first one is the idea of vocational center and exhibition gallery, which fulfills the needs and help empower different stakeholders, whereas the streets create new spaces according to the needs of people, which also helps in improving social community interactions and reinvent public interaction spaces and increase the functionality in Paharganj. Next is the combined strategy plan, which talks about our combined interventions as to what we are offering in Paharganj. First, we look at on-street parking, which offers and regulates better parking spaces and pedestrian walkways along with casual spaces. The green line depicts the green streets which are located in the maximum residential areas so as to maximize their interaction. The blue line depicts the play streets for kids to play in safety and under the supervision of their parents. The red line depicts the hawker streets, which are designated spots for hawkers and provides them a sense of ownership. The yellow lines are the market street spots. Marked in blue and pink are the temporal parkings and the sites for interventions respectively, thus fulfilling the public interest and solving the conflicts of the people of Paharganj.
Hi, we're Group 10 and this is our narrative for the Urban Design Studio. The dynamic fabric of Paharganj isn't only limited to its physicality but is also dictated by dimensions that reflect the living patterns of the users. Our group intends to understand these economic and socio-cultural dimensions, and the larger question we ask is, we began our study by mapping out the consumption patterns across Paharganj, namely commerce, amenities and culture. Contribution patterns were studied on the basis of existing infrastructure and its subsequent influence on the fabric.
There exists a grave issue in Paharganj: the lack of participation of women on streets. The men to women ratio is 60:40, but where are the women? The current scenario has stringent gender roles. The deeper issue is the lack of ability for women to claim public spaces like men in Paharganj. Our major aim is to empower the women of Paharganj by increasing their consumption from the urban fabric and by creating awareness of their contribution. This can be done when women feel that the place Paharganj belongs to them, and Paharganj offers inclusivity, liminality, social security and interaction between all its users, especially women. The first strategy deals with triggering social interaction and consumption of the urban fabric by improving educational and social infrastructure for the women of Paharganj. There lies a disconnect with the relationship of place of worship and open grounds where social interaction could possibly take place.
The second sub-strategy is increasing consumption of commerce and subsequently the urban fabric by women in Paharganj via partial street redevelopment. The existing disparity in the field of commerce can be highlighted by the number of shopkeepers on the site. Third sub-strategy is provision of public amenities to strengthen communication and trigger employment opportunities while promoting the consumption of liminal spaces by women of Paharganj via adaptive reuse of public spaces. The existing scenario suggests that the nearest government facilities are around a kilometer away and there is no platform for the people of Paharganj to formally interact with government bodies.
Our first intervention focuses on improvement of social infrastructure via bhajan mandis across Paharganj. Second intervention focuses on improvement of educational infrastructure via the proposal of a module called the Chalta Firta School. Third intervention focuses on increasing the consumption of commerce and subsequently the urban fabric by women via a secure urban trail. Our fourth proposal is a Seva Kendra run by women for women that focuses on strengthening communication and triggering employment opportunity. These interventions serve as triggers to empower the women of Paharganj by increasing their consumption and subsequent contribution. This in turn helps in the development of Paharganj's urban fabric.